We often use profile families to create 3D forms in both the project environment, where we use them for railings or sweeps, and the family editor environment, where we also can use them for sweeps or swept blends. A profile is a simple 2D shape created in the family editor in a profile family, and then loaded into one of these other environments and used to create the 3D object. In the massing environment, we can't actually load in profile families directly. That workflow won't work the same way. But we can do almost exactly the same thing that we can do with profile families using simple generic model families. You create a generic model family, you draw your profile shape there, load it into your massing family, and then you can use it in much the same way. For example, I can create a shape and sweep it along this path that I've got drawn right here. So what I have open on screen is a massing family, which is called Main Entrance Molding. And this is actually an adaptive component family. And if you watched the last movie, then you recall that we can go to family category and parameters here on the ribbon, and it could be generic model, or we could choose some other category for this. So for example, I could put this in the doors category or the curtain panels or even casework. It's an exterior molding, so casework may not be exactly the right category, but just to show you that we can choose a different category, I'm going to go ahead and choose that as casework for the time being. Now, these reference lines, I simply traced on top of the main entrance of our museum file and copied and pasted them out here. And you can see that their distance away from the center matches where they should go back in that file. To create the profile, you would go to New, Family, scroll down, and instead of choosing the profile template, which is what you would typically do in the project environment, here you would choose just the generic model template. Open that up, and you would just simply start drawing with model lines here on the Home tab and draw whatever shape you wanted your profile to be. Save that, load it into your family, and then that profile would become the shape that you could use to base your 3D geometry on. Now, I'm actually going to close this one, and I'm not going to save it because over here I have a file already created as a molding called Molding Profile. And it is a generic model. So you can see there, it's just a generic model family. And these are just model lines. And I've drawn them in the shape that I want the profile to be. And I've drawn them relative to the two reference planes to get the insertion point right there at that corner. The dimensions just help me design the molding at the sizes I wanted, and they won't show up later when I load it into the file. I'm going to click Load into Project up here on the ribbon. Choose my Main Entrance Molding as the file I want to load it into. You'll see it come in. If I zoom in over here, you can see that I've got the insertion point right at that corner there. And I'm going to snap it to this gray line that I've pasted in from the other file to tell me where the little alcove is at the entrance to the museum. So that gets the molding right in the correct spot where I need it to go. Even though it's a generic model, if I select it, zoom out a little bit, and this path with my control key and do Create Form, it will create that 3D form directly from that generic model shape. And so that's really all there is to it, to use a generic model as a profile. What's the advantage of doing so? In the same way that we use profile families in the traditional environment, and later we can open up that profile family and edit it if we wanted to, and then reload it in, all the forms and shapes that we've used based on that profile will update as a consequence. So let's say that we decided that we wanted to return to our molding profile and make a modification. Perhaps I want this little flat area here to be a little bit broader. So I'm going to make a Windows selection around all of this line work. Come up here, I'm going to use the Activate Dimensions. You could also use the Move tool if you prefer, but I like the Activate Dimensions option. That lights up the dimensions that I can change, like this one right here. And perhaps I want that distance to be 8 inches instead of 4.5. So I'll just type in 8 inches. Load it back into my project, Main Entrance Molding, click OK. When it prompts me, I'll overwrite the existing, and you'll see that it grows right there and the molding updates all the way around. And so that's really the advantage of using this external shape. The other advantage is I could use it on multiple moldings. I wouldn't have to keep redrawing it. I could just use that one shape over and over again on several forms. Now let's take this family and load it into project. And this time we'll load it into Samoka V2. That's another file that I had open in the background. It's with the exercise files. That's actually a Revit project file, RVT. Click OK. And that takes me into the floor plan of the Samoka V2 project. Right at my cursor, there's this big old dot. That's the actual insertion point. And then below it are these two smaller dots. That's the actual 3D model of the molding. Like our other massing families, you may notice that it's actually highlighting a plane here, and it's kind of an odd way. And more importantly, if I start moving around in the file to try and place it, you'll see it jump to the wrong face altogether. See here, it's oriented the way we want, and then suddenly it jumps. That's because up here, my two placement options that we've looked at before in previous movies are active, and it defaults to place on face. What I want to do is place it on the work plane. And the work plane in this case is the main level floor plan. So now if I come in here, you can see that if I snap right to, let me zoom in and make sure I'm getting it, right there, the molding will drop in exactly the correct location. I got to zoom in pretty far to see it. So what I'm going to do instead is go to 3D view. Let's click the modify tool just to make sure that we're not placing any additional moldings, cancel out of that. And then I will zoom in, and there is the molding in exactly the spot where it needs to go. To get the same basic behavior as profile families that you would normally have in projects or in standard families, you use generic models in the massing environment. In other ways, they behave exactly the way as profiles do. You draw your shape in the generic model, you load it in, and then you can use it to create your 3D forms. Then with adaptive components, as we saw in the last movie, we can actually take those 3D forms and categorize them as anything we like casework in this case.